Venezuela's electoral authorities announced the termination of the deadline extension for candidates' nominations for the November elections. Health authorities in Cuba met with the World Health Organization representatives to get emergency use authorization for anti-COVID vaccines developed in the country. The Taliban have captured 11 outposts and killed 34 members of the armed resistance in the province of Panjshir. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, this is from the Zalva and Maria Gomez. The National Electoral Council in Venezuela announced the termination of the 24-hour deadline extension for candidates' nominations for the next regional and municipal elections scheduled for November 21st. The decision was evaluated by the electoral authorities in order to facilitate the participation of a greater number of political organizations as part of the mechanism of dialogues between the government and the opposition sectors. The so-called unitary platform, formed by the extreme right-wing opposition in Venezuela, announced its participation in the next elections and proceeded to register its candidates. The electoral entity emphasized that the extension of the deadline for the registration of the candidates did not have any impact on the electoral planning for the next phases of the ongoing process. Meanwhile, the government of Venezuela ratified a defined agenda to resume the dialogue process with the opposition initiated in Mexico. The president of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, informed that the government delegation has an agenda with proposals mainly focused on the economic and social topics and on the attention of the Venezuelan people. The head of the parliament also said that the memorandum of understanding signed by the parties will mark the route for the next talks. The legislators specified that the return of the assets that are blocked abroad will be the central issue and crucial access to be able to solve the needs of the population, the main beneficiary in this process of dialogue. We stay in Venezuela. President Nicolás Maduro pointed out that as a result of the consequences of the economic blockade of the United States, a distorted economy was generated. Maduro also indicated which are the advances in the fight against the economic deviations.
The distortions that were created were brutal as a result of the economic war, the criminal sanctions, the imperialist blockade. Distortions were created that brought about great conflicts, and we have to consolidate the solutions for supply, for national production, for fair trade, for balanced and accessible prices, for economic diversification. A balanced and healthy economy is only possible with a process of production and sustained national.
In other news, the Brazil Supreme Court once again postponed the high-profile ruling over the time-frame argument that will define the future of the demarcation of the indigenous lands in the country. On August 27th, the Supreme Court joined the analysis after reading a report on the rule of one of the most important cases of this second semester. The court must determine the legal validity of the Iberama indigenous land in the state of Santa Catarina. The temporary framework establishes that indigenous lands are those occupied by traditional peoples in 1988, date of the Constitution, and proof of ownership is required. Meanwhile, the indigenous people whose reserves occupy 13% of the national territory do not agree with the time frame because they were forcibly expelled from their territories before that date during the 1964 and to 1985 military dictatorship. Lawmakers in Chile passed a draft bill for a fourth withdrawal of the 10% of pensions funds. The draft bill passed with 7 votes in favor and 6 against, and it will face a new vote next week. The initiative seeks to alleviate the economic situation that thousands of Chilean families are going through by being able to access a part of the pension saving funds. The initiative still has a long way to go in the parliament, since after being voted in the committee, it will have to pass to the Chamber of Deputies and, if approved, to the Senate. Congressperson Pamela Gilles referred to the bill.
This fourth withdrawal will be an incentive to improve the country's economic indicators, an incentive to work, an incentive that will not affect inflation, because those who claim that inflation will increase as a result of the withdrawals are not only wrong, but they are also lying.
In addition, the deputy of the Humanist Party, in Spanish Partido Humanista, stated that the federal pension agency system has expired and has not improved in 40 years, so it will be necessary to move on to another model of pension funds.
This outdated system is dead. The pension withdrawal fund system is finished as a traditional system, simply because they do not work for Chileans. 1,053 million pesos a day are the profits of the pension fund. However, they do not improve the pensions and have not improved in 40 years. They have stolen the people's money. They have profited with them, and we have hunger pensions. Therefore, this fourth withdrawal is one of the way to the agony of the pension fund, in which we will have to move to another provisional model.
Protesters in El Salvador mobilized once more against President Nayib Bukele's plan to make Bitcoin a legal tender. Demonstrators also condemned the arrest of Maria Gomez, computer and cryptocurrency expert, by representatives of the National Civil Police. According to Gomez's attorney, the police detained him without an arrest warrant, seized his phone, and attempted to take possession of his computer. In a statement, the police said Gomez's arrest was related to an investigation for financial fraud. The detention could be connected with the IT specialist's recent activities, where he openly criticized the president's decision to make Bitcoin a legal tender and pointed out the shortcomings of the law that is to come into force on September the 7th.
It is not that we are against cryptocurrencies or other crypto assets. Previously, cryptocurrencies were already being used in other parts of the country, and there was no need for a law, but now this law is being proposed with the aim of regulating a series of situations that we see as money laundering.
We'll be right back after this very short break. Welcome back. Health authorities in Cuba met with representatives of the World Health Organization to get emergency use authorization for COVID-19 vaccines developed in the country. Cuban scientists held talks with WHO authorities to get the emergency use authorization for the vaccines created on the island, such as Soberana 02, Soberana Plus, and Abdala, as well as vaccine candidates Soberana 01 and Mambisa. Eduardo Martinez, president of BioCuba Pharma, recalled they have exchanged positive experiences with the international organization when dealing with emergency use authorizations, like the Herbert Biovac HB and Kimi HIB vaccines. Currently, around 50% of Cuba's 11.3 million residents have received at least one dose, with more than 3.5 million fully vaccinated. The Association of European Business blamed the extraterritorial sanctions imposed by the United States against the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline that several companies built to elevate Europe's energetic self-sufficiency and security. According to the organization, the United States opposes the pipeline's construction because U.S. companies want to sell schist-based local gas from their deposits in the European market. Nord Stream 2 was planned to diversify the supply routes and forces the assembling of two branches that will connect Russia and Germany across the sea bottom of the Baltic Sea. The infrastructure is designed to transport up to 55,000 million cubic meters of fuel per year. The works were suspended in December 2019, then resumed a year later due to sanctions and threats from Washington. The death from the remnants of the Hurricane Ida rose to at least 13 people after the northeastern United States became overwhelmed by fierce downpours and localized floodings. 8 of these fatalities were reported in New York, where at least 8 centimeters of rain fell in just 1 hour in Central Park. On the other hand, a tornado in southern New Jersey leveled a stretch of houses, and some drivers have reportedly been stranded since Wednesday night. More than 200,000 homes in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania remain without power, and states of emergency have been declared across the region.
We've got a high water rescue going on right now. I was the one who called the, or they called, because I did.
In Spain, heavy rains triggered flooding on Wednesday, causing power cuts and interruptions in transportation services. Flooding follows torrential rain in eastern Spain, with some coastal areas overwhelmed. One of the worst hit areas was Alcanar, south of Barcelona, where huge torrents of fast-moving water surged through the streets, sweeping away everything in its path. 2 major roads in the area were cut off and a local train service partially suspended, with local officials urging residents to stay at home. Spain's weather service has warned of a serious risk of flooding in central and northern parts of the country. Torrential rains are becoming ever more frequent in Spain, with flooding causing 7 deaths in the southeast in September 2019. Another 13 fatalities due to a storm island of Mallorca in 2018. Experts say global warming is directly linked to these episodes of intense rain and flooding. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a virtual meeting with the United States Special Presidential Convoy for Climate, John Kerry. The U.S. representative is in China's northern city of Tianjin for climate talks. During the meeting, the Asian diplomat stated that China-U.S. cooperation on climate change serves interests of both sides and the rest of the world and enjoys a broad development prospects, but such cooperation cannot sustain without an improved bilateral relationship. John Kerry, also former U.S. Secretary of State, expressed his hope that the two sides could achieve leadership in climate change and commit to fully implement the 2015 Paris Agreement.
We're all going to be dealing with this certainly for the rest of our lives that we face on a global basis.
We have shown our sincerity. Everyone who met with you will have to spend 14 days in quarantine, but we are willing to pay that price to discuss cooperation with the U.S. on issues of mutual concerns, as two major countries in the world. Cooperation is the only correct option and the keen expectation of the international community.
Given the science and what's happening, that we're all going to be dealing with this certainly for the rest of our lives. And I think a challenge is as big as any that we face on a global basis. And China, my friend, plays a super critical role.
A new law in Nigeria sets a new alarm of the relations between the country's rural working communities and oil companies. The tensions rise in the oil delta region of the Western African nation, where its inhabitants suffer firsthand the domain of petroleum enterprise interests. An oil law set to own overhauling the industry and improving the conditions of communities living on crude-producing land passed after 20 years of wait. The pollution and influence of the oil business has affected the economic and social activities of the populations near the extraction and production stations in such a way that poverty proliferates, maintained by state neglect. Farming and fishing livelihoods were lost due to the big foreign companies that operate in Africa's largest crude producer, which, despite the petroleum industry bill, is far from compensating the damages done to many rural workers. The bill states that 3% of the earning of oil companies are to be given to the communities instead of the 10% the inhabitants consider fair. The Nigerian oil delta region is historically known for conflict over the sharing of the wealth provided by the energetic industry.
I think that is not enough because the destruction was too much and the number of people there were much. And then I think the mode of sharing put some things in place, like in Ibubu there is no water, there is no good school, there is no good road.
Over 255 hectares of land, including our stream, destroyed. The money will be used for development, will be used to maintain those who have suffered for years. There are a lot of families that have died because of this pillage.
UNICEF launched a campaign to collect data to address humanitarian needs after the earthquake that devastated Haiti and left more than 2,000 dead. UNICEF estimates that some 1.2 million people in Haiti, including 540,000 children, were affected by the powerful 7.2 magnitude quake that caused the collapse of hospitals, schools, and homes. Meanwhile, more than 119,000 people are in need of clean water, and many families there continue to face desperate conditions. Children urgently need medical care, and displaced people need shelter. UNICEF highlights in its donation campaign to provide aid to some 385,000 affected people. We have more stories coming up after this final short break. Welcome back. The Taliban have captured 11 outposts and killed 34 members of the armed resistance in the province of Panjshir. Sabiullah Mujahid, spokesman of the Taliban movement, said that the Mujahideen have had enough progress, and among those killed were 2 commanders. He also affirmed that Panjshir's main road is under Taliban control. The opposing front to the Taliban rule, the self-named Islamic Emirate in the Afghan valley of Panjshir, only active resistance since the takeover of on August 15th, tweeted that the group Al-Qaeda is also involved in the conflict. United States left Afghanistan, history repeats itself, said part of the message. According to the facts of the resistance forces, 350 Taliban were killed in the confrontations, while 287 were injured and another 35 made captive. Taliban spokesman Mujahid, on his side, reported only 2 injured men and no significant losses. Pakistan keeps its borders closed to Afghan asylum seekers who try to flee after the takeover of the Taliban, despite the European Union's intentions of having countries from the Central Asian region take in the families of the collaborators and those opposed to Taliban rule. The high officials of Pakistan and the army claimed that no Afghan asylum seeker will keep in Pakistan soil, where already almost 1.5 million Afghan nationals are registered. Not even one person has received the refugee status so far, said Pakistan's Minister of Interior, Sheikh Rashid Ahmad, this week. China's foreign ministry requested an investigation into the crimes committed by the U.S. military personnel against the civilian population during their 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. China's foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin condemned recent reports that U.S. forces had fired on civilians following the bombing at the entrance of the Kabul airport last Thursday. He also pointed to a series of attacks committed against civilians by U.S. troops and NATO forces since the beginning of the occupation. He also recalled that, according to the latest data, at least 47,245 Afghan civilians had been killed in the war up to April 2020. In this regard, China urged to protect the lives of Afghans and defend their human rights. In the meantime, the spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs called on the European Union to immediately stop provocative and confrontational actions regarding a report on political relations and cooperation with Taiwan.
The so-called EU-Taiwan Political Relations and Cooperation Report prepared by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament seriously violates the basic norms of international relations, the One China principle, and the public commitments made by the EU on the Taiwan issue when China and the EU established diplomatic relations. China strongly condemns and firmly opposes this. We urge the relevant committees and members of the European Parliament to immediately correct the wrong words and deeds related to Taiwan and avoid further damage to China-EU mutual trust and cooperation.
In other news, Indian Kashmir region's independence leader Syed Ali Shah Gilani died at age 92 on Wednesday night. The leader's youngest son detailed that the security forces came in his residence and took him immediately after passing away, leaving the families unable to finish the customary mortuary rites. He insisted that the authorities buried him in secret, strategy used by law enforcement in Kashmir to avoid protest and a gathering of followers around the bodies or shrines of the deceased. Hours after Gilani's death, authorities mandated curfew and cut cell phone service in the whole Kashmir Valley to prevent the assembly of followers of the political leader who planned to have a goodbye ceremony in Srinagar.
It was after great difficulty that they allowed us to attend the funeral. The police disallowed people to participate in the washing ritual that was held near the mosque. It wasn't allowed at his home. There were barely 50 to 60 people at the funeral. I have come from Umpara Budgam to offer funeral prayers. We didn't hear about Gilani's death last night, and since morning the mobile services have been shut down. He was buried hurriedly during the night. We condemn the government's action of stopping people from participating in the funeral.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I am Barry Gomez. Thank you for watching.